Yes, so today I want to talk about visual strategy and diplomatic signaling, where I analyzed the mixed ductus in the cuneiform tablet KB018. So let's start. I've gotten the idea for this paper by being genuinely interested in how humans can switch between styles of writing and scripts for different purposes, mostly through my own experience with writing. So since I do like cuneiform, I wanted to further examine this changes of writing for different purposes through the treaty KB018. It's from the Hittite capital Hattusha and written in the Akkadian language in the cuneiform script. To introduce the particular intricacies of the tablet and to go further into the topic, I wanted to begin visually with a few diagnostic signs. So now you're looking at the same sign written by the same scribe on the same tablet, within a few lines of each other. On the left, here you can see the Hittite variant of the sign T. It's compact, vertical, the wedge geometry seems more efficient, contained, and local. This is what a Hittite trained scribe produces by default, by motor habit, by institutional formation. On the right, here you can see the Assyro-Mitannian variant. The horizontal wedges are more elongated, and they dominate the geometry. To produce this form, the scribe must physically rotate his wrist compared to the other sign. He must alter the pressure of the stylus against the wet clay. He must override his own trained default. The question I'm bringing to this conference is not, what do these signs mean linguistically? The phonetic value is identical. The question is, instead, what does this visual shift mean? The sign La. Same structure, Hittite on the left. The eternal symmetry is redistributed. Strokes are repositioned, carrying the local tradition. And the Assyro-Mitannian on the right. It has a different internal logic, a different weight distribution, and a different relationship between the strokes. And Ni. As you can see in the attestations of the foreign variant here, it appears suddenly in the middle of otherwise standard passages written in the Hittite Ductus. Traditionally, scholarship has called this phenomenon the mixed ductus, which I will go more into later. And traditionally, it has been understood as a problem of inconsistency, scribal error, and contamination, imperfect mastery of a foreign tradition. I want to propose something different. I would like to argue that what you have been looking at for the last minutes is not inconsistency. It is a visual strategy. The scribe is not failing to maintain consistency. He is engineering deliberate shift in visual register for a specific readership at specific textual coordinates, for specific political reasons. Therefore, I want to examine in the following minutes what the shift between the ductus implies for the physical, cognitive, and visual experience of writing a treaty like this. Before we move on, a quick note on methodology. I couldn't measure the exact angle of every single stroke, which I wanted to in first place to get more reliable and safe data. Because the available photographs just don't allow for it. There's no good scale on the site. So instead, my physical analysis works on two levels. First, a qualitative look at the signs and their geometry, and second, a quantitative mapping of where these signs actually appear. Before I establish the precise categories we are working with, let me situate this within the broader writing studies conversation. Script switching as communicative practice has been identified across writing traditions. UNCEF's sociolinguistic framework establishes that script choice constitutes a decision about visual identity. And Schiek and Sovada also demonstrate this in 19th century German handwriting, where alternation between Kurenschrift, which we talked about on the in-person days, a bit, so I'm not going to explain that further. And Latin script conveys education, cultural affiliation, and hybrid identity. And where switches are predominantly functional rather than accidental. This is illustrated here in this letter where you can see the euch, which means you, which is written in the Latin script, and the rest of the letter is written in the Kurrentschrift. And to highlight this, this is further highlighted by the exclamation marks and the dots behind it. And they also examined that predominantly foreign words are also written in the Latin script instead of the Kurrentschrift in the letters they examined. So my idea is that the mixed ductus in KB018 operates by the same logic 3 millennia earlier and in clay. So now I need to establish the three categories of script we are working with, since the argument depends on the precision of these distinctions. State 1, the Hittite ductus. The script attested in contemporary Hittite administrative and literary texts at Boğazköy. Compact, vertically oriented. The default graphic output of the Hittite chancellery. State 2, the non-Hittite ductus. Specifically, the Assyro-Mitannian tradition. Broader sign geometry, more prominent horizontal wedges, a more open aesthetic that indexes a different scribal school, a different geographic origin, and a different political orbit. And finally, state 3, the mixed ductus, which we find in this tablet. Both traditions coexisting within a single text, not as an accident of transmission, as a sustained graphic phenomenon. And here's the critical point. If the mixed ductus is a system, it must be governed by a logic we can derive from the distribution of the signs. The rest of this presentation attempts to find that logic and to make it more visible. So, I'm framing the next two slides explicitly as a necessary detour into historical context before we return to the visual evidence. The presence of Assyro-Mitannian sign forms at Hattusha is not random. It is a direct material consequence of imperial expansion. The collapse of the Mitanni state in the mid-14th century and the subsequent Hittite vice-regency at Carchemish, which is here, compared to Hattusha, Boğazköy, which is here, fundamentally altered the flow of administrative knowledge across the region. Syrian and Mantinean graphic conventions hence entered the Hittite administrative system not as a foreign contamination, but as the technical vocabulary of empire. By this point, Hittite scribes had access to both traditions and could choose between them. The mixed ductus hence reflects that expanded political geography. And let me now introduce the specific document. The parties are Hattushili III of Hatti and Bintishina of Amurru. The date is the mid-13th century in the aftermath of the Battle of Kadesh, and the political situation is profoundly unstable. Bintishina defected, was disposed, and later restored by Hattushili III to stabilize the Syrian frontier. This treaty KB018 is the formal instrument of that restoration. I want to stress what this means for the visual argument. This is not a routine administrative record. It performs a political act, the rehabilitation of a former traitor, the relegitimization of a vassal whose loyalty has been compromised. Every physical attribute of this object carries diplomatic weight. The script, I will argue, is not a passive container for this content. It is one of the instruments through which the restoration is executed. It is also worth noting that the visual code switching is not isolated. The tablet also contains Akkadian linguistic features, a convergence of visual and linguistic signaling that reinforces rather than contradicts the diplomatic alignment argument. So my main thesis, as I said, is that the mixed ductus equals visual code switching, metapragmatic signaling for a diplomatic readership. Let me unpack that. If these foreign forms were the result of a scribe losing control of his native habits under cognitive load, we would expect them to scatter randomly across the clay. But as the spatial distribution will show us later, this is not what happens. My argument is that the oscillation between sign traditions is not a failure of competence, it is an exercise of it. The scribe is code switching not between languages, but between visual registers. I mean, he's also kind of code switching between languages since he's a Hittite scribe writing in Akkadian, but let's put that to the side for now. He is calibrating the graphic appearance of the text for a specific readership, an international diplomatic audience trained to read the Ductus before reading the words. And to prove this was a deliberate strategy and not just a sloppy mistake, we have to look at the physical reality of the clay. We must ask, what does the Ductus shift actually cost the body? So first look at the bottom row here, at the overgrown Winkelhaken, which is this sign here, which you can find here, here, and here, written with the head of the stylus. This isn't just a larger wedge, as Mark Whedon describes it, it is a heavy elongated impression. A standard Hittite Winkelhaken as seen here is produced by a quick, vertical application of the stylus, a movement deeply ingrained into the scribe's motor memory. But look at the definition of the overgrown variant. A slip of the hand would produce as much. This, however, is geometrically precise and it is more defined than the default. This heightened definition is our first proof. The scribe isn't losing control, he's exerting it. Now let's look at what this requires from the body. To achieve the specific Assyro-Mitannian geometry, the scribe must fundamentally change his stylus habit. As illustrated here with the example of general stylus use, he must rotate his wrist to switch the corner of the stylus tip. He has to change the inclination and orientation of the tool relative to the clay. This is what I mean to call the physical cost of the switch. The scribe is overwriting years of institutional training. He is forcing his hand to perform a foreign habit. This requires active cognitive retrieval of a separate tradition. In this moment, the geometry of the wedge becomes a record of a body moving differently. This is not accidental variation. It is a learned movement performed deliberately. So the next part I want to talk about is how these signs distribute on the tablets. As I said, if the scribe was making mindless mistakes, we would expect foreign forms to pop up randomly next to the Hittite signs, but let's look at that. This is the density plot, which shows the distribution of signs and clustering. The x-axis represents the linear progression of the text. The y-axis represents the concentration of sign types per section. The section labels, preamble, historical prologue, and stipulations give us the textual coordinates. The blue boxes are the Hittite, the orange are the ambivalent signs, and red the Assyro-Mitannian. I used all of the signs which could be sorted into one category for certain. And a few uncertain and ambivalent signs to show the distribution more clearer and to also visualize the problems we face when examining this data due to the amount of signs we can't surely sort into one category. The first, what I would call cluster. Obverse lines 21 to 30. The historical prologue. And what does the text say here? Benteschina speaks in the first person. He describes himself as in the formal legal language of the late Bronze Age, a dead man whom the king has brought back to life. This is not rhetorical flourish. In the diplomatic register of the 13th century BC, this language constitutes a legal transition, from non-existence to sovereignty, from exile to legitimacy. And in this precise coordinate, the scribe shifts to the Assyro-Mitannian Ductus. The foreign forms do not change the legal content of this restoration, but they drastically change its visual authority. By deploying the International Graphic Register at the exact moment of Bentushina's legal resuscitation, the scribe signals diplomatic alignment and makes the restoration visually legible to the international audience. I'm not arguing that the scribe consciously chose the foreign forms as a deliberate editorial decision in the modern sense. I'm arguing something more structural, that the Hittite chancellery possessed a systematic practice in which the visual register of a text was calibrated to its diplomatic function. The second cluster reverse lines 6 to 8. The text shifts here from the Hittite Amuro bilateral relationship to the international stage. Babylonia is mentioned, hostile territories are defined, and the document expands geographically. But I do want to acknowledge on this point that this is probably the most argued point of the paper, and more data from other tablets, which also utilize the mixed ductus, would be needed to get a clearer picture of the clustering. Now, the distribution evidence is compelling, but the erasures make it decisive. In normal scribal workflow, a mistake is corrected immediately and locally. The scribe smooths the clay, re-impresses the correct form, and continues. This is not what we find here on this tablet. The redactional evidence is systematic and directional. The erasures cluster at the same coordinates as foreign signs, as seen here. To that, numerous erasures on this tablet are identified, at least 11 on the obverse alone. A specific editorial stage must have existed. An intentional revision of the text. And here's the decisive point. The redactional process eliminated unintentional errors like confusion of signs. But the foreign sign forms survived that process. They were reviewed and kept. If the mixed ductus were an error, we would expect the erasures to remove the foreign signs, to restore consistency, to correct toward Hittite. The archival status of KB018 as a redacted draft strengthens rather than weakens the intentionality argument. The redactional process eliminated unintentional errors. The foreign signs survived that process, and the redaction is the indication of that institutional intent. If we accept this redactional evidence, we must identify the institutional agents capable of producing it. The historical record gives us 2 scribal schools in 13th century Hattusha, documented by Gordon. The Anuwansa circle, which utilized the local Anatolian tradition, and the Vairasati circle, the chief scribes, holders of the title Galdupsar, which literally means great scribe. The lineage of the Vairasati family is critical here. They descend from Mitanamua, a name literally meaning strength of Mitanni. This family was active precisely during the reign of Hattusili III. They were a bicultural elite that retained a scribal identity linked to their Syro-Mitannian heritage. I do not assert that a member of the Vairasati family personally held the stylus for KB018. What I argue is that their institutional presence in the chancellery created the systematic capacity for a text like this to exist. To this scribal circle, the mixed ductus would not be an error. It would be a professional signature, the materialization of a bicultural identity in the graphic output of the state. The Amana letters provide the crucial external test for this argument. The letters EA 41, 42, and 44, sent from Hatti to Egypt, all were written in the mixed ductus. The foreign forms are present, and the visual register is international. EA 43, however, shows no such variation. It is written in pure Hittite forms throughout. If the mixed ductus were simply the default graphic output of the Hittite scribal hand, if it were an inevitable product of the Akkadian language or of the scribe's training or of their foreign exposure, then EA43 would surely look like the others. It does not. The mixed ductus was activated for specific letters and withheld from others. It was a register, not a reflex. A choice, not a habit. Within the Boğazköy corpus itself, KUB 314, classified by Klinger as Syrian throughout, provides a further comparandum. The same chancellery produced a text in a consistently foreign graphic register, demonstrating that the full range of ductus options was institutionally available and selectively used. So finally, let me draw the threads together. KB018 must be understood as a hybrid system, operating in two visual registers. To draw a modern analogy, the hardware, the tablet's format, dimension, clay, archival conventions, all Hittite. The administrative framing, the column structure, the line spacing, these assert Hittite imperial authority through their material form. And the software, the mixed ductus, Assyro-Mitannian sign forms impressed onto that Hittite substrate, calibrated for Assyrian diplomatic readership. To a Hittite archive reader, it presents as a standard imperial document. To an international diplomatic audience, the foreign sign forms signal cultural familiarity, political alignment, and membership of the prestige community in late Bronze Age diplomacy. The Ravasati circle, hence, when the Syro-Mitannian graphic program on the Hittite administrative hardware. By doing so, they did not merely record a political restoration, they executed it. The geometry of the wedges was the instrument of that statecraft. To conclude, I want to leave you with 3 takeaways. First, what we see in this treaty is not scribal noise. It is a clear, deliberate signal. The foreign signs don't just wander across the clay. They cluster exactly where the diplomacy demands it. Second, whether we look at the spatial data, the physical effort required for the overgrown Winkelhaken, or the systematic evidence of erasures, all signs point towards the same thing. Intentionality. And finally, the mixed ductus was never an accident. It was a high-level tool, a visual register used by an elite scribal circle to bridge the gap between Hattusha and the international world. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to questions and discussion.